All right, guys, we're back. New York Muscle Radio, episode number 63. It's your host Anthony Bevilacqua. I got my co-host Big Picacharian in here, and we got on the line here AJ Morris. AJ's joining us all the way from the UK, a hop, skip, and a jump away. What's up, pal? What time is it? Your time? Naps. We don't take naps here in New York Muscle Radio podcast. No naps, buddy. All right, so we're gonna jump right into this today. Today's episode is gonna be a cool one. We're talking a little bit about the foundations of bodybuilding. Whenever you do anything, you have to make sure you lay down a strong foundation. So bodybuilding is just the same, and things have changed a lot since me and Pete had started. I remember being a teen; things were totally different than what they are now. So that's why we got AJ on the line here. He's gonna jump in with us, and he's gonna kind of give his viewpoint on what it's like to kind of be a teen nowadays, and where bodybuilding is for him versus where it is for us and where we started. Right, big guy? Oh, you're still a teen. What are you sleeping over there? I mean, look at it this way. AJ found us from the podcast, man. Podcasts weren't around when we were there. AJ, how did you find us? Just out of curiosity. See how easy that is, man? You know what we had to do? I remember I don't remember, was it just strictly magazines? Remember when I started, it was just the magazines. We used to have to wait every month. Yeah, we would wait for those. Yep. All right, so let's get this thing rolling. So, what type of changes do you think you need to make from just working out to becoming a competitive bodybuilder, whether as a teen or as a beginner? So, what has to start to happen to go from just working out to becoming a competitive bodybuilder? What do you think, Pete? See, for me, it was something a little different because I knew I wanted to start competing right away, but I just always felt like, well, I don't have the mass that I need to compete yet, so I'm just gonna keep training and keep training and keep training. So I actually didn't start competing until I was 21. So I had actually just missed the juniors category, which sucks completely. So that's kind of how it went for me. You know, I didn't feel ready until I was that age. But since AJ's around that age now, he's actually 19 years old. So AJ, tell us a little bit about how you went from just plain working out to becoming a competitive bodybuilder. Man, I wish I started competing at 18, 19. So for you, that's exactly what it was. It was just like, okay, I'm having some a good half month, 6 months of working out. So I think I'm going to compete now. Is that kind of how it worked? Like, what made you decide to get into the competitive part of it? I think also too. I think it was a little different between Pete. How old are you when you first competed again? All right, so you were his age, but I think it was. I think for us, it wasn't as known as it is now. You know, now you could scroll on Instagram and you could see it. So I think that that's where the difference is. Between us and him as far as that goes, because you could scroll through Instagram and you see other teens, his age competing, and he's like, oh, I could if these guys could fucking do it, I could do it. So right now in 2016, as a beginner, what are the common resources and methodologies for young bodybuilders? So I guess where do they get their information from? AJ, where do you get your information from? So you're looking up, you want to get leaner. Where do you go to look? Yeah, that's a good idea. He was kind of young too, I think, when he started, right? Yeah, see, Pete, when we started, we had the forums, and people and guys used to put their journals on there, and they used to write out their workouts and what they used to do, and that was how me and you learned. I know that, and I think it's something totally different to be said from a video, rather than reading stuff. And we mentioned this before in the podcast. This is why we did a podcast, is because we feel like we absorb this information, a lot better hearing it and seeing it than like in a YouTube video. So I think that's why a lot of these guys, even beginners nowadays. I think it's a little easier for them because they could just watch a video and actually see what the guy's going through, and it's something totally different than reading it on the screen. Yeah, you could barely see like everything is squared, everything is all pixelated. We had to ask. Yeah, it's so different. So definitely a different way. I mean, like I said this in another podcast. I wish I was starting in 2016. Mm-hmm. All right. So, what are some common mistakes you see as a beginner starting out? So, Pete, what do you think? As a beginner starting out, what do you see? Big mistake. See, I think that with the beginners, I think that the most common mistake they make is not taking all the information that they're looking through on whether it's YouTube or bodybuilding.com or whatever, and they're not applying that information and thinking maybe that they're above all that. And I think I did that a little bit in the beginning too. Oh, okay, this guy says eat protein, so I'm just going to eat as much of it as I can, not applying exactly what I was reading to what was going on. So I think that that's a common mistake that beginners make. When we started, Pete, when AJ started, and when people who are actually listening to this who are starting maybe today, that's what they're going to make. That's the mistake they're going to make. So overcome that by actually applying what you're seeing. What about for you, AJ? What do you think? Mm-hmm. I agree with that, and like you said, especially as a beginner, you could always get away with a lot more for less. You could always get away with doing a lot less and still making progress. And I think if you jump into a beginner, an advanced routine, you're going to miss out on those beginner gains that you could actually make, doing less. And I think that's very, very important because when you become advanced, how much more could you add on? If you're starting with Kai Green's workout now, and you're gaining on that, exactly. Then you're just doing one of my routines, right, Pete? So, all right. So let's see. How do you know when to begin competing? So how did you know it was the right time to begin competing for yourself, AJ? Like, how did you know? Okay, I'm ready now. Like now I'm dieting down. Like this is where I have to be. Do you want to jump in there, big guy? You look like you want to say something. Yeah, I think when you should begin trying to compete, especially if you're a teen, I would say you need at least a year and a half to 2 years under your belt of good hard mass gaining. Really trying to build up some size because otherwise you're just gonna die down. You're gonna be nothing. You're gonna be pretty much skin and bones because you don't have much to build. Especially if you're a skinny guy, an ectomorph type of a body. Trying to build yourself up and compete. So I think you need a 2 year approach of hardcore mass gaining. And that was why for me it took me a long time because I was really skinny growing up, and I said, if I want to compete, definitely need to put on more mass. So I'm gonna wait. And again, then you get to the point where you're like, it's never enough. Okay, I need to be bigger. I need to be bigger. I need to be bigger. So I think after 2 years of a hardcore bulk, I think then you could start really dieting down and competing. But once you get rid of that initial phase of like putting on muscle, I think any time is a good time, really. AJ, for you now, so like, you know, when did you decide this was all going to be for you? Like, I'm curious how this played out in your mind. Like, did you see bodybuilding, see Matt August first, and say, okay, I'm going to compete and do that one day? But did you like gain weight first? Like, how did it work out for you? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree too. Plus, you need to be able to maximize your metabolism, and this is similar to what we talk about in the Maximizing Your Metabolism audiobook that we have on NewYorkMuscleRadio.com. That's part of the flexible dieting, cracking the flexible dieting audiobook. It's a bonus section that we added on. But if you have no calories to build off of, you're going to diet with nothing, and you're going to have a hard contest, your first contest. So that first mass gaining phase is going to build up your metabolism to be able to start handling calories like that. So when you actually comes time to diet, you have something to diet from. Come on, big guy. I know you want to jump in on that one. See, for a beginner now, you have us to tell you this, but when I started, I didn't do that. I didn't have my big bulk until later on in my bodybuilding career. It wasn't until later on that after I competed that I went on that big bulk. But, it's definitely necessary, and I still feel gains from it. I can only imagine what it's like to do that in the beginning. That's got to be crazy. Exactly. All right. So, what type of training do you think is optimal for a beginner or a teen, someone starting out? Pete, what do you think? What about you, AJ? I'm curious, where did you start? So I was gonna say, did your approach change? So go ahead. Hmm. I think that for a beginner, I think the best type of training is, I would say, something like a starting strength. I think that that's going to be more optimal than a one time a week body part routine, only because it's important to use and focus on those main movements and learning progression right from the beginning. Because for me, in the beginning, progression was never something I was emphasizing on. I was just kind of going into the gym and kind of getting a pump, and that's kind of where I started. A little different from what's out there now, but I feel like with starting strength and that type of a program where you're focusing on progression, and that's the main thing that you're watching, is so much better for a beginner, because that's the foundation of everything, and that's what's going to take you to the advanced level, learning how to progress in those movements. Aside from everything else, stop worrying about, like you said, weak points training and that type of stuff, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Focusing on progression right from the beginning, I feel like, is what's going to set you on the right path throughout your whole training course. So, whether it's starting strength, 5-3-1, whatever it is, those types of training programs are going to be the ones to be consistent throughout, that are going to give you those results to take you to advance, like I said. And you could ride those programs out for a long time too. I mean, you could ride out the 1 time a week program, but you're not really going to learn progression doing it that way. Linear progression like that, it's always going to be longer to achieve those type of results. I mean, at least for me anyway, that's kind of where I feel like that would take someone from a beginner to an advanced. So should a beginner, in your guys' opinion, should a beginner begin with clean eating or flexible dieting? Go ahead, big guy. Yeah, I agree. I think that, learning the basics on just proper nutrition, what foods are good, what foods are healthy, what foods contain this amount of protein, what foods contain this amount of carbohydrates. I think that that's important for a beginner to learn. Forget how many calories are in a Pop Tart. You should be focusing on eating 80% of your food clean, quote unquote clean, healthy sources of food, foods that are filled with fiber, a lot of vitamins and minerals. You got to learn what those are before you practice flexible dieting. I think the principle of flexible dieting is important, and you have to learn that, figuring out at least how many calories you're taking in. I think that should be where a beginner should start, in my opinion. If I could start someone from, okay, I want to work out. Okay, this is what I should do. You focus on just calories, just focus on counting calories, and focus on eating healthy foods for right now. That's what it's going to take for the beginner, and then you slowly start going from there and progressing from there. But that's definitely where I go. And it's interesting that you brought that up, Pete, with the whole clean eating versus flexible dieting to start out with, because we preach flexible dieting so much now, but we kind of forget that clean eating was where we both started from. So AJ, you said you had followed Matt Ogus for a while. So he was into flexible dieting. Did you start with flexible dieting, or did you start with like kind of clean eating, or how did it start for you? Hey, Pete does that. If you follow Pete on Instagram at Jack JAKKED Fitness, he posts up his Quest bar and his Milky Way. Milky Way, right? Milky Way. Go ahead, AJ. I want to hear your beginning. All right, so we're gonna throw out a case study here. So for a beginner who may just happen to type in, bodybuilding on iTunes and came across our podcast, a beginner who's interested in gaining muscle and getting leaner decides to start lifting weights and eating better. What approach would you take to begin his journey? So we'll let AJ take this one since he's the closest to a beginner. Go ahead, bud. So if a beginner came to you, yeah, gain muscle and get leaner. Yeah, I agree. I think the approach I would give would be put someone on like a starting strength type program. I would let them log their calories. I would put them in a mass gaining first. Unless they were overweight, then I would probably reverse it a little bit. But I would probably have them diet down just to a reasonable body fat. I wouldn't get them like stage ready or anything like that. But let's just say they were a good body fat. I would start them on a mass gaining phase, counting only calories, focus on getting 80% of their food cleanly, putting them on a starting strength type program, and just watching them grow from there. What about you, Pete? That was pretty cut and dry from me, but and You're the long answered question, long-winded answered question. Perfect, man. I think that was a great way to end this podcast. So, man, I wish I was a beginner in 2016 because we'd probably be 3 times the size we are now. All right, AJ, where can the listeners find out more about you? Because I think, 19 years old, you got a lot of, long ways to go in the sport, and you're already pretty ahead of most people. So, where can people find out more about you? All right, guys. It was a great episode, and hopefully there'll be a beginner who listens to this and say, you know what, I'm going to listen to those guys. I think they know what they're talking about. But Pete, it's your time, bud.